billionaire husband neglected wife for 6 months, until one selfie changed everything. She posted a single photo, a tear-streaked selfie with a caption that shattered the illusion of her perfect billionaire marriage. Within hours, the world knew the truth. Behind the glamour, behind the headlines, behind his success, she was breaking. What began as one woman's cry for help became the story that would either destroy their marriage or save it. This is The Selfie That Saved a Marriage, a story of love, loss, and rediscovery in a world that worships perfection. Before we begin, please, kindly subscribe to this channel, like, comment, and share. I'll be so happy if this story touches hearts all over the world, from the United States to Australia, from the United Kingdom to Africa to Asia to all over the world. Hello my wonderful family. Welcome back to your family channel Sammy Stories. May Almighty bless your hearts with peace, and may every woman watching this remember, your voice matters, your truth matters, and your heart deserves to be seen. Now, let's begin today's powerful emotional story titled, The Selfie That Saved a Marriage. A story of a woman who dared to speak the truth, even when it meant breaking her own world apart. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long shadows across the Italian marble floors. Emma Rodriguez stood in her silk nightgown, staring at the empty side of the bed that had remained untouched for yet another night. The Egyptian cotton sheets were still perfectly pressed, just as the housekeeping staff had left them yesterday morning. It was 6:47 a.m., and her husband, Alexander Chen, hadn't come home again. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the chill of the air conditioning against her skin despite the luxurious warmth of their $15 million Manhattan apartment. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was surrounded by everything money could buy, yet she felt poorer than she'd ever felt in her entire life. The Damien Hirst butterfly painting on the wall, worth more than most people's homes, seemed to mock her with its vibrant colors. She was trapped in a gilded cage, and the bars were made of platinum credit cards and empty promises. Emma walked slowly to the bathroom, her bare feet silent on the heated floors. She caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. At 28, she should have been in the prime of her life. Her honey brown hair, which Alexander used to love running his fingers through, now hung limp around her shoulders. Her hazel eyes, once bright with hope and love, seemed dull and lifeless. She'd lost weight, not the healthy kind that comes from taking care of yourself, but the kind that comes from forgetting to eat because you're too heartbroken to feel hungry. 6 months. It had been exactly 6 months since everything changed. 6 months since Alexander's company, Chen Technologies, had gone public and their lives had transformed overnight. 6 months since her husband had slowly, methodically, completely disappeared from their marriage while still technically being her husband. Emma turned on the shower, adjusting the temperature to scalding hot, hoping the physical pain might distract from the emotional ache that had become her constant companion. As the steam filled the room, she thought back to how it all began, how the man she'd fallen so desperately in love with had become a stranger who occasionally slept in the same house. 3 years earlier, Emma had been working as a junior architect at a mid-sized firm in Brooklyn. She'd been 25, fresh out of graduate school, and full of dreams about designing buildings that would make a difference in people's lives. She'd been assigned to a small renovation project for a then-unknown tech startup, and that's where she'd met Alexander Chen. He'd been 30 years old, handsome in an understated way, with kind dark eyes that crinkled when he smiled and a work ethic that bordered on obsessive. But back then, his obsession had still left room for life, for joy, for love. He'd been building Chen Technologies from the ground up, working 18-hour days, but he'd always made time to grab coffee with Emma during their project meetings. Those coffee breaks had turned into lunch meetings, which had turned into dinner dates, which had turned into weekend getaways. Their courtship had been like something out of a movie. Alexander had been driven and ambitious, yes, but he'd also been present. He'd looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. He'd asked about her dreams, her designs, her thoughts on everything from architecture to philosophy to the best pizza in New York City. He'd made her feel seen, valued, cherished. You're going to design buildings that change skylines, he told her one night as they'd walked along the Brooklyn Bridge, the city lights twinkling around them like stars had fallen to earth. And I'm going to build technology that changes lives. We are going to do this together, Emma. I promise you, no matter how successful we become, we'll never forget what matters. Us, our future, our family. She'd believed him. God, how she'd believed him. They'd gotten married exactly 1 year after they met, in a small ceremony in Central Park surrounded by close friends and family. Emma's parents had flown in from Texas, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their daughter marry a man who so clearly adored her. Alexander's mother, a formidable woman who'd immigrated from Taiwan and built a successful restaurant chain through sheer determination, had welcomed Emma into the family with surprising warmth. My son has never looked at anyone the way he looks at you, she told Emma at the reception, grasping her hands tightly. Don't let him forget what's important. Successful men can sometimes lose their way. Be his compass, Emma. Emma had promised she would be. She just hadn't realized how hard it would be to guide someone who'd stopped listening to directions entirely. Emma stepped out of the shower and wrapped herself in a plush towel, the kind that cost more than she used to spend on groceries in a month. She went through the motions of getting ready, moisturizer, a light touch of makeup, though she wasn't sure why she bothered anymore, a casual but elegant outfit consisting of designer jeans and a silk blouse that Alexander had never even seen her wear. She walked into the kitchen, a masterpiece of modern design with custom cabinets, professional-grade appliances, and a marble island that could seat 8 people. The personal chef, Maria, had already prepared a breakfast spread that could feed a small army. Fresh fruit, pastries from Emma's favorite bakery, smoked salmon, avocado toast, fresh-pressed juice. Emma felt her stomach turn at the sight of it. Good morning, Mrs. Chen, Maria said warmly, though Emma could see the pity in her eyes. The staff knew. Of course they knew. You couldn't hide a marriage falling apart from the people who cleaned up the evidence of your lonely dinners and unchanged beds. Good morning, Maria, Emma replied, forcing a smile. This looks wonderful, but I'm not very hungry. Maybe just coffee. Mrs. Chen, you barely ate yesterday, Maria said gently. At least have some fruit. The strawberries are especially good today. Emma nodded, not wanting to hurt the woman's feelings. Maria had worked for them for 2 years now, and she'd become something of a confidant, one of the few people Emma talked to regularly these days. She sat at the island and picked at a few strawberries while Maria poured her coffee. Black, strong, just the way she liked it. Mr. Chen called earlier, Maria said carefully. He wanted me to remind you about the charity gala tonight. The car will pick you up at 7. Emma's hand froze halfway to her mouth, the strawberry forgotten. The gala. She'd completely forgotten about the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser, one of the biggest social events of the season. Alexander would be there, of course. He never missed events that were good for business, good for networking, good for the company's image. The fact that his wife would be by his side was just another box to check, another element of the perfect billionaire CEO image he'd so carefully cultivated. Did he say if he'd be coming home to get ready? Emma asked, hating how hopeful her voice sounded. Maria's expression said everything. He said he'd meet you there, Mrs. Chen. He has back-to-back meetings until 6:30. Of course he did. Emma nodded, swallowing hard against the lump forming in her throat. Thank you, Maria. After breakfast, or rather, after pushing food around her plate for 20 minutes, Emma retreated to her home office, a beautiful space she designed herself with built-in bookshelves, a view of Central Park, and a drafting table where she used to spend hours working on personal projects. These days, it mostly gathered dust. She hadn't worked since the IPO. Alexander had insisted she didn't need to, that they had more than enough money, that she should focus on herself, maybe take up some hobbies, join some charitable boards. Enjoy your life, he'd said. You've worked so hard for so long. You deserve to relax. But Emma didn't want to relax. She wanted to create, to build, to matter. She tried to go back to work after a few months, but the architecture firm she'd reached out to had suddenly become distant, professional, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of employing a billionaire's wife. She'd realized with dawning horror that she'd become known not as Emma Rodriguez, talented architect, but as Mrs. Alexander Chen, trophy wife. She sat at her desk now and opened her laptop, scrolling through social media without really seeing it. Her feed was full of other people's lives, college friends advancing in their careers, former co-workers winning design awards, acquaintances getting engaged or having babies or buying their first homes. Everyone seemed to be moving forward while she was stuck in place, suspended in amber, preserved but not really living. Emma's phone buzzed. A text from Sophia, her best friend since college and one of the few people who still treated her like a normal human being rather than a walking black card. Sophia, lunch today? I'm in the city and I miss your face. Emma felt a rush of relief. Sophia was exactly what she needed right now. Someone who knew her before all of this. Someone who remembered when Emma's biggest worry was whether she could afford to supersize her coffee. Emma. Yes. Please. Name the time and place. Sophia. That desperate, huh? Le Bernardine at 1 p.m.? I know you can get us in. Emma smiled despite herself. Sophia wasn't above using Emma's new status for the occasional fancy lunch, but she did it with such honest humor that it felt like a joke they shared rather than exploitation. Emma. Done. See you then. She had a few hours to kill. Emma found herself wandering through the apartment, a space that was supposed to be a home but felt more like a museum. Every piece of furniture was designer, every painting carefully curated, every surface perfectly styled. But it was all so cold, so impersonal. None of it felt like hers. None of it felt like them. She ended up in Alexander's study, a place she rarely entered. His domain. The walls were lined with awards, framed magazine covers featuring his face, photographs of him shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. His massive mahogany desk was neat but not pristine. There were papers scattered across it, sticky notes with reminders, a cold cup of coffee from God knows when. Evidence that he actually lived, actually worked, actually existed as more than just a ghost who occasionally texted her through his assistant. Emma sat in his leather chair and spun slowly, taking it all in. There was a photograph on his desk, one she'd given him during their first year of marriage. It was from a weekend they'd spent at a cabin in the Catskills, both of them bundled in sweaters, her arms around his neck, his smile wide and genuine. They'd spent that weekend making love, cooking together, talking about their dreams, planning their future. They'd talked about having 3 kids someday. They'd picked out names. They'd laughed about how their children would probably be terrible at both architecture and coding because the universe had a sense of humor. She picked up the photograph, studying it closely. When was the last time Alexander had smiled at her like that? When was the last time he'd looked at her with such undisguised adoration? When was the last time they'd talked about anything other than logistics and schedules? Her phone buzzed again. Another text, but this one made her blood run cold. Alexander. Spoke with Maria. Glad you remembered the gala. Wear the red Valentino. Photographer will be there from Vogue. Important for company image. No good morning. No how are you? No I miss you or I'm sorry I didn't come home or I love you. Just instructions on what to wear, reduced to a prop in his carefully orchestrated public image. Emma's hands trembled as she set down the photograph and the phone. She felt something crack inside her chest, some last bastion of hope crumbling. This was her life now. This was her marriage. Empty rooms, empty words, empty everything. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the last time Alexander had truly seen her. Not glanced at her over his phone, not nodded absently while she spoke, but really looked at her the way he used to. She couldn't remember. The memory was buried somewhere under 6 months of neglect, of cancelled dinners, of promises broken so many times that she'd stopped believing in them at all. Le Bernardine was packed with the usual lunch crowd, business executives, socialites, tourists who'd saved up for months to eat at one of New York's most celebrated restaurants. Emma arrived exactly on time, greeted by name by the maître d', and escorted to one of the best tables in the house. She ordered a glass of wine even though it was only 1 o'clock, needing something to take the edge off. Sophia arrived 10 minutes later, a whirlwind of energy in a vintage band t-shirt and jeans, her curly black hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked so wonderfully normal, so refreshingly real, that Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "Oh no," Sophia said immediately, sliding into her seat and reaching across the table to grab Emma's hand. "What did he do now?" "Nothing," Emma said, and then laughed bitterly. "That's the problem, Soph. He does nothing. He is nothing. At least, not to me." Sophia's dark eyes filled with concern. "Talk to me. And don't leave anything out." Over expensive seafood that Emma barely tasted, she told Sophia everything. Not just the surface-level complaints, but the deep, bone-crushing loneliness. The nights spent alone in a bed meant for two. The way Alexander looked through her rather than at her. The feeling of being erased from her own life, becoming nothing more than an accessory to his success. "He doesn't even ask about my day anymore," Emma said, her voice cracking. "I could literally tell him I'd been abducted by aliens and he'd probably just nod and say, 'That's nice, honey,' without looking up from his phone. I'm invisible, Sophia. I'm married to a billionaire and I've never felt more worthless in my entire life." Sophia squeezed her hand tightly. "Emma, honey, you know what I'm going to say." "Don't," Emma whispered. "You need to leave him." "I can't." "Why not?" Sophia's voice was gentle but firm. "And don't give me that I love him bullshit. You can't love someone who isn't even present to be loved." Emma pulled her hand away, wrapping both arms around herself defensively. "You don't understand. It's not that simple. I keep thinking, maybe it's just this phase. Maybe once things settle down at the company, maybe once is not under so much pressure." "Emma." Sophia leaned forward, forcing Emma to meet her eyes. "It's been 6 months. 6 months of him treating you like you don't exist. At what point do you stop making excuses for him? At what point do you start choosing yourself?" "I made vows," Emma said weakly. "So did he. And is breaking them every single day." The truth of those words hit Emma like a physical blow. Sophia was right. She knew Sophia was right. But knowing something intellectually and being ready to act on it were two completely different things. "I'm not ready," Emma whispered. "I'm not ready to give up on us. On what we were. On what we could be again." Sophia sighed, but her expression softened. "Okay. I respect that. But promise me something. Promise me you'll set a deadline. You can't do this forever, Em. You can't keep drowning while you wait for someone to notice you're underwater." Emma nodded slowly. 3 months. If things haven't changed in 3 months, I'll consider my options. It felt like a betrayal just saying it, but also like a lifeline. 3 months. 12 more weeks of trying, of hoping, of waiting for her husband to remember that he'd once promised to love her for better or worse. Surely that wasn't too much to ask? The rest of lunch was lighter. Sophia talked about her work as a public defender, the ridiculous cases she was handling, the terrible dates she'd been on. Emma found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in days, remembering what it felt like to be human, to connect with someone, to feel like more than just a beautiful ghost haunting a luxury apartment. But as they said goodbye on the sidewalk, Sophia gripped Emma's shoulders and looked her dead in the eyes. "I love you, Em. And I'm worried about you. Please, please take care of yourself. And if you need me, if you need anything at all, you call me. Day or night. Understood?" Emma hugged her tightly. "Understood. Thank you, Soph. For everything." On the car ride home, Emma stared out the window at the city rushing by. People hurrying to meetings, couples walking hand in hand, someone's grandmother feeding pigeons in the park. All these lives being lived, all these people existing in the moment, connected to the world around them. She felt like she was watching everything through glass, separated from real life by money and loneliness and the slow death of a marriage. Back at the apartment, She had a few hours before she needed to start getting ready for the gala. She should have been excited. It was, objectively, a glamorous event. A chance to wear a beautiful dress, to see and be seen, to support a worthy cause. But all she felt was dread, knowing that she'd spend the evening standing next to Alexander while he networked and charmed and completely ignored her except when there was a camera pointed in their direction. Emma walked into her closet, a space larger than her first apartment, and found the red Valentino dress Alexander had specified. It was beautiful, she had to admit. The kind of dress that cost more than a car, that had been custom-tailored to her exact measurements, that made her look like she belonged in the pages of a fashion magazine. She pulled it out and held it against herself, studying her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at her was polished, elegant, the very picture of a successful man's wife. But she wasn't Emma Rodriguez, the girl from Texas who dreamed of designing schools and community centers. She wasn't the woman who'd fallen in love with an ambitious tech entrepreneur in a tiny startup office. She wasn't anyone she recognized anymore. On impulse, Emma grabbed her phone and held it up, angling it to capture her reflection with the dress. She looked at the image critically. Her expression was sad, almost haunted, despite the luxurious setting and expensive gown. There was something so fundamentally wrong with this picture, such a stark contrast between the external appearance of wealth and success and the internal reality of emptiness and pain. She didn't post it. She just saved it to her phone, a strange sort of documentation of this moment, this feeling, this version of herself that she both was and wasn't. The car picked Emma up at exactly 7 p.m. She'd spent 2 hours getting ready with the help of a professional hairstylist and makeup artist. More evidence of Alexander's need for perfection in his public image. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, her makeup was flawless, and the red Valentino dress fit like it had been painted onto her body. She looked, by any objective measure, absolutely stunning. She felt dead inside. The ride to the Plaza Hotel took 20 minutes, and Emma spent most of it taking deep breaths and trying to prepare herself for the evening ahead. She'd gotten good at this over the past 6 months. Putting on the mask, playing the role, being the perfect billionaire's wife. Smile, nod, make pleasant small talk, pose for photos, pretend everything is wonderful. It was exhausting, but she'd learned that exhaustion was better than the alternative, which was letting people see how broken she really was. The plaza was lit up like a jewel box, photographers lined up outside, a red carpet leading into the ballroom. Emma's car pulled up and a valet immediately opened her door. She stepped out into a barrage of camera flashes, holding her clutch purse in front of her like a shield. Mrs. Chen. Over here. Mrs. Chen, look this way. She smiled on autopilot, turning slightly to give them better angles, knowing these photos would appear in tomorrow's society pages. There would be captions about her dress, speculation about her jewelry, Harry Winston, of course, admiring comments about how Alexander Chen had married up. They'd never mentioned the fact that she'd arrived alone, that her husband hadn't even bothered to pick her up for an event he'd insisted she attend. Inside, the ballroom was a fantasy of white flowers, crystal chandeliers, and perfectly dressed people holding champagne flutes and trading gossip like currency. Emma accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and scanned the room for Alexander. She spotted him almost immediately. He was impossible to miss, tall and handsome in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, surrounded by a cluster of other tech executives and venture capitalists. He was laughing at something someone had said, his phone in one hand even as he shook hands with the other. He looked happy, relaxed, completely in his element. Emma felt a sharp pain in her chest. This was the man she'd married. Charismatic, brilliant, magnetic. It was just that none of that magnetism was directed at her anymore. She started making her way across the room, stopping every few feet to exchange pleasantries with people she barely knew. Yes, the apartment renovation is going wonderfully. No, we haven't planned our next vacation yet. Yes, Alexander is doing amazing things with the company. Lies and half-truths and the careful maintenance of an image that was more important than the reality it was meant to represent. Finally, she reached Alexander's circle. He noticed her approaching and his expression shifted subtly. Not quite annoyance, not quite discomfort, but something in that family. The look of someone being reminded of an obligation they'd forgotten about. "Emma," he said, and she hated how formal her own name sounded in his mouth. He leaned in to kiss her cheek, a gesture so perfunctory it made her want to scream. Up close, she could smell his cologne, the same one he'd been wearing since they met, the scent she used to bury her face in his neck to inhale. Now it just made her sad. "You look beautiful," he said, but he was already looking past her, his attention drifting back to his conversation. "Thank you," she replied. "You look nice too." It was possibly the most impersonal exchange they'd had in years, and they were surrounded by dozens of people who would have killed to be in her position, who thought she had it all. The next 2 hours were torture. Emma stood next to Alexander as he networked, contributing the occasional comment when directly addressed but otherwise serving a silent, beautiful decoration. He didn't hold her hand. He didn't put his arm around her waist. He barely acknowledged her presence except when someone asked them to pose for a photo, at which point he'd pull her close, smile broadly, and then immediately release her the moment the camera clicked. During dinner, they were seated at a table with several other power couples. The conversation flowed around Emma like she wasn't there. Talk of mergers and acquisitions, of private jet schedules, of vacation homes in Aspen and the Hamptons. The wives at the table seemed content to discuss fashion and charity work, and Emma tried to participate, but her heart wasn't in it. These weren't her people. This wasn't her life. Or rather, it was her life, but it wasn't one she'd chosen. It was one that had chosen her. "Mrs. Chen, you must be so proud of your husband," one of the wives said, a woman named Clarissa whose husband had made his fortune in hedge funds. The IPO was the most successful tech debut in years. "I am," Emma said automatically. "Alexander has worked incredibly hard." "And now you can enjoy the fruits of that labor," Clarissa continued, gesturing around the opulent ballroom. "This is the dream, isn't it? Beautiful clothes, beautiful parties, no worries about money. You're living every woman's fantasy." Emma forced a smile, but inside she was screaming. This was every woman's fantasy? Being invisible to your own husband? Having everything money could buy but nothing that actually mattered? She wanted to stand up and shout the truth, that she'd trade every penny, every designer dress, every square foot of their penthouse for just one day of the marriage she used to have. But of course, she didn't. She just nodded and sipped her champagne and played her part. It was during the charity auction that Emma finally hit her breaking point. Alexander had pledged $500,000 to the Children's Hospital without even consulting her, which would have been fine except that he announced it from the podium with her standing next to him, his arm around her waist in a display of unity that was completely false. "My wife and I believe that every child deserves access to world-class healthcare," he said into the microphone, and the crowd applauded. Emma felt sick. He'd used their marriage, used her, as a prop for his generosity. And the worst part was that she'd once cared deeply about this cause, had talked to Alexander about wanting to be involved in hospital design, in creating healing spaces for sick children. But he didn't remember that. He didn't remember anything about her dreams, her passions, her desires. After the announcement, Alexander immediately got pulled into another conversation, leaving Emma standing alone near the edge of the stage. She felt tears threatening and knew she needed to escape before she made a scene. She slipped out of the ballroom and into the ladies' room, a marble sanctuary of soft lighting and fresh flowers. Emma locked herself in a stall and finally let herself cry. Silent tears streaming down her face, shoulders shaking, one hand pressed against her mouth to keep from making noise. This was her life. This was her marriage. She was 28 years old and she felt ancient, worn down, used up. How had this happened? How had the greatest love story of her life turned into the loneliest chapter? After a few minutes, she pulled herself together, dabbed at her eyes carefully to preserve her makeup, and stepped out to wash her hands. She was alone in the restroom, thank God. She couldn't face the fake sympathy of other women right now, couldn't endure another round of "you're so lucky" or "Alexander is such a catch." Emma pulled out her phone, intending to text Sophia, needing some connection to reality. But instead, she found herself opening her camera app. She looked at her reflection in the ornate mirror. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect dress, and eyes that were absolutely dead inside. The contrast was jarring, disturbing even. On impulse, she held up her phone and took a selfie. Then another. Then another. Each one capturing a different angle of the same fundamental truth, that you could have everything and nothing simultaneously, that beauty and wealth couldn't mask the absence of love. She looked at the photos critically. In them, she could see everything she'd been hiding for months. The sadness, the loneliness, the slow dissolution of her sense of self. These weren't the kinds of photos wives of billionaires were supposed to post. They were too raw, too real, too honest. Something shifted inside Emma as she studied those images. A tiny spark of defiance, of rebellion. She was so tired of pretending. So tired of maintaining the perfect image. So tired of protecting Alexander's reputation while her own soul withered away. Without overthinking it, before she could talk herself out of it, Emma selected the most striking photo, the one where you could see both the luxury surrounding her and the emptiness in her eyes, and opened Instagram. Her account was private, followed only by close friends and family, not the public persona she was supposed to maintain. Her fingers moved almost of their own accord, typing out a caption. 6 months of silence. 6 months of invisible tears. 6 months of wondering if anyone can see that I'm drowning in plain sight. The Plaza Hotel, $30,000 dress, $2 million in jewelry, and the loneliest I've ever felt. When did we stop being we? When did I stop being me? Hashtag lost, hashtag lonely, hashtag not as well as it looks. Her finger hovered over the share button. This was crazy. This was reckless. This could humiliate Alexander, could damage his reputation, could violate the unspoken agreement she'd made to maintain their perfect public image. But something Sophia had said at lunch kept echoing in her mind. At what point do you start choosing yourself? Emma hit share. For the first few minutes after posting the selfie, Emma felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with terror. What had she done? She'd just publicly aired her private pain, had potentially embarrassed her husband, had violated every rule of the society she'd married into. She should delete it. She should take it down before anyone saw it. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked back into the ballroom with her head held high. If she was going to implode her carefully maintained image, she might as well do it with dignity. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Emma made polite conversation, smiled at the appropriate times, and stood next to Alexander for the obligatory goodbye photos. He never once asked if she was okay, never noticed that something had shifted, never looked at her closely enough to see that she'd been crying. She could have been anyone standing there in that red dress. She was simply a role he'd hired someone to fill. They left separately. Alexander had an early morning meeting and was going straight to the office from the hotel, while Emma took the car back to the apartment. She should have been used to this by now, but it still stung. They'd attended their first major social event in months, had been photographed together dozens of times, had smiled and touched and played the happy couple, and he still couldn't be bothered to go home with her. In the back of the car, Emma pulled out her phone. She had notifications. A lot of notifications. Her post had already gotten responses from the 20 or so people who followed her private account, concerned messages from college friends, supportive comments from former co-workers, and a string of texts from Sophia that ranged from OMG Emma to finally to I'm so proud of you to call me as soon as you're home. But there was one notification that made her blood run cold. A voicemail from Alexander's assistant, Jennifer, left just 10 minutes ago. Emma's hand trembled as she played it. Mrs. Chen, this is Jennifer. I'm so sorry to bother you after the gala, but we have a situation. Your Instagram post has somehow been leaked to a gossip blog, and it's starting to gain traction. Mr. Chen is in an emergency meeting with the PR team. He'd like you to delete the post immediately and make yourself available for damage control first thing tomorrow morning. Please call me as soon as you get this message. Emma's heart hammered in her chest. How had a post from her private account been leaked? Who had taken screenshots and sent them to gossip sites? She opened her browser and searched her name, feeling sick as the results loaded. There it was, her photo, her words, splashed across Celeb Gossip, Business Insider, and several smaller blogs. The headlines were brutal. Trouble in Paradise? Billionaire Alexander Chen's wife posts cryptic message about loneliness. The dark side of tech success. Emma Chen's emotional Instagram post raises questions. Is all well in the Chen household? Wife's disturbing selfie suggests otherwise. The articles had already been shared thousands of times, with comment sections exploding with speculation, judgment, and the occasional note of sympathy. Emma scrolled through them with a growing sense of horror and fascination. Gold digger probably wants more money. This is what happens when you marry for wealth instead of love. Actually feel bad for her. Money can't buy happiness. Alexander Chen can do better than this attention-seeking drama. Something is clearly wrong. Hope she's okay. Emma dropped her phone like it had burned her. What had she done? She'd wanted to speak her truth, to stop pretending, but she hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted to become tabloid fodder, to have thousands of strangers dissecting her marriage and her motivations and her worth as a person. Her phone rang. Alexander. For the first time in months, her husband was actually calling her directly instead of communicating through his assistant or via brief text messages. Emma answered with shaking hands. Hello. What the hell were you thinking? Alexander's voice was cold, clipped, angrier than she'd ever heard him. Do you have any idea what you've done? Our PR team is working overtime to contain this. The board is furious. Our investors are concerned about stability. Jesus Christ, Emma, what were you thinking? I was thinking, Emma said, her own voice rising, that maybe someone should know the truth. That maybe I'm tired of pretending everything is perfect when I'm dying inside. So you decided to air our dirty laundry on social media? You decided to humiliate me publicly? Do you know how many deals could be affected by this? How many people are questioning my judgment right now? Your judgment? Your judgment. Emma was fully yelling now, months of suppressed rage finally erupting. What about my feelings? What about our marriage? What about the fact that you haven't had a real conversation with me in 6 months? That's not true. When is my birthday, Alexander? Silence on the other end of the line. When is my birthday? Emma repeated. What's my favorite color? What was the last thing I said I wanted to do? When did we last have dinner together? When did you last tell me you loved me and actually mean it? More silence. Then, quietly, Emma. You don't know, do you? You don't know anything about me anymore because you stopped paying attention. I'm your wife, Alexander. I'm supposed to be your partner, your best friend, the person you chose to spend your life with. But I'm not any of those things. I'm just another item on your to-do list, another element of your public image to be managed. That's not fair, Alexander said, but his voice had lost some of its anger, replaced by something that might have been guilt. You know how demanding things have been. The IPO, the expansion, the investors. I know, Emma interrupted. I know all about the company. Everyone knows all about the company. The whole world knows about Chen Technologies and its brilliant CEO. But nobody knows about us anymore, Alexander. I'm not even sure there is an us anymore. Don't say that, he said, and now he definitely sounded scared. Emma, don't say that. We are married. We love each other. This is it's just a difficult phase. A difficult phase. Emma laughed bitterly. Alexander, when you're going through a difficult phase, you're supposed to go through it together. But you shut me out. You disappeared. And now you're only calling me because I embarrassed you, not because you actually care about how I'm feeling. She heard him take a deep breath. That's not true. I do care. Emma, I can't do this right now. I have 17 missed calls from board members. Can we please just talk about this tomorrow? After you delete the post. No, Emma said quietly. What?
No.
I'm not deleting it. Those are my words, my feelings, my truth. I'm done pretending. Emma, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. For the first time in 6 months, I'm being completely honest. If you can't handle that, if the company can't handle that, then maybe we have bigger problems than a social media post. You're being selfish, Alexander said, and the coldness was back in his voice. You're putting your need for attention above everything we've built. Emma felt something inside her finally break. Not crack, not bend, break completely. Everything you've built, you mean? I haven't built anything, Alexander. You made sure of that. You wanted me to quit my job, to be available for you, to be the perfect billionaire's wife. And I did it. I gave up my career, my independence, my sense of self. And for what? So I could be alone in a $15 million apartment while you work 20-hour days and forget I exist. That's dramatic. It's true. Emma was crying now, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. It's true and you know it. When was the last time you came home for dinner? When was the last time we went to bed at the same time? When was the last time you touched me like you actually wanted to, not just for a photo op? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was tired. What do you want from me, Emma? I want my husband back, she whispered. I want the man I married. I want to matter to you again. You do matter to me. Then prove it. Come home, Alexander. Right now. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now. Show me that I'm more important than a PR crisis or a board meeting or whatever deal you're working on. Another long pause. Emma held her breath, hoping, praying that this would be the moment he chose her, that this would be the wake-up call that finally broke through his obsession with work. I can't, he said finally. Emma, I can't just leave in the middle of this. There are too many moving parts, too many people depending on me to fix this. But I'm depending on you, Emma said, her voice breaking. Your wife is depending on you. Doesn't that count for anything? Of course it does, but... There's always a but, Emma interrupted. There's always something more important than us. Than me. That's not fair, Emma. You knew what you were signing up for when you married me. You knew I was ambitious, that I was building something. I married a man who made time for me, Emma said. Who made me feel loved and valued and seen. I didn't marry a workaholic who only remembers I exist when I become a PR problem. I don't have time for this right now, Alexander said, and she could hear the frustration in his voice. We'll talk tomorrow. After things calm down. Just, please, Emma, delete the post. For me. And there it was, the final nail in the coffin of whatever hope she'd been clinging to. Even now, in the middle of a crisis in their marriage, he was more concerned about his image than her pain. No, Emma said. I'm done protecting your image at the expense of my truth. I'm done being invisible. Emma. Goodbye, Alexander. She hung up before he could respond, then immediately turned off her phone, unable to handle any more calls or texts or notifications. She sat in the back of the car, makeup streaked down her face, designer dress crumpled, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. But underneath the loneliness, underneath the pain, there was something else, a tiny spark of something that felt almost like relief. She'd finally told the truth. She'd finally stopped pretending. And whatever happened next, at least she wouldn't be living a lie anymore. Emma spent a sleepless night in the guest bedroom, unable to face the master suite with its empty spaces and broken promises. She'd changed out of the Valentino dress and into one of Alexander's old college sweatshirts, one he'd given her years ago when they were still happy, when they still felt like a team. It smelled like laundry detergent now, not like him, but it was still comforting in a bittersweet way. Around 3 in the morning, she turned her phone back on. The notifications had multiplied exponentially. Her post had gone viral, really viral. It had been shared over 50,000 times, had been picked up by major news outlets, was trending on Twitter. She'd become the unwitting face of a conversation about marriage, wealth, loneliness, and the price of success. There were messages from people she hadn't talked to in years, ranging from genuine concern to thinly veiled curiosity. There were interview requests from morning shows and magazines. There were angry messages from Alexander's business associates, blaming her for damaging the company's reputation. And there were thousands of messages from complete strangers, some supportive, some cruel, all of them treating her private pain like public entertainment. But there was one message that caught her attention. It was from Alexander's mother, sent just an hour ago. "Emma, dear. I saw the news. I'm coming to see you tomorrow. Today, I suppose, given the time. 10 Uhr morgens. We need to talk. With love, Susan." Emma's relationship with her mother-in-law had always been complicated. Susan Chen was a formidable woman, brilliant, successful, and demanding. She'd built her restaurant empire from nothing, had sacrificed everything for her son's success, and had very definite ideas about duty, family, and the role of a wife. Emma both admired and feared her. The rest of the night passed in a haze. Emma alternated between reading responses to her post and staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what she was going to do next. One thing was becoming clear: she couldn't just go back to the way things were. The dam had broken, and there was no putting the water back. Susan Chen arrived at exactly 10 a.m., dressed impeccably in a Chanel suit, her silver hair perfectly styled. Maria let her in, and Emma met her in the living room, still wearing Alexander's sweatshirt and a pair of leggings, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She looked like hell and she knew it. "Emma," Susan said, her face unreadable. For a moment, Emma braced herself for criticism, for accusations, for being told she'd failed in her duties as a wife. Instead, Susan pulled her into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry," Susan said quietly. "I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. I'm so sorry I didn't help you." Emma started crying again. She seemed to be doing a lot of that lately. Susan held her, making soothing noises, being more maternal than Emma had ever seen her. When Emma finally pulled away, wiping at her eyes, Susan guided her to the couch. "Tell me everything," Susan said. "And don't leave anything out." So Emma did. She told Susan about the 6 months of loneliness, the cancelled dinners, the empty bed, the feeling of being erased from her own life. She told her about losing herself, about giving up her career, about becoming nothing more than an accessory to Alexander's success. She told her about the gala, about the breaking point, about the post and the phone call and Alexander's refusal to come home. Susan listened to all of it without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When Emma finished, Susan was quiet for a long moment, her jaw tight with barely suppressed anger. "My son," she said finally, "has become exactly what I raised him not to be." Emma looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" Susan sighed, looking suddenly older. "Emma, do you know why I never remarried after Alexander's father left?" Emma shook her head. She knew that Susan had raised Alexander alone, that his father had abandoned them when Alexander was just 5 years old, but Susan had never talked about it in detail. His father was a successful businessman, Susan said. Brilliant, ambitious, driven, just like Alexander. And just like Alexander, he became so obsessed with success that he forgot about the people who love him. He worked constantly, chased every opportunity, climbed every ladder. And one day, I realized I was raising our son alone even though I was married. So I left him. I decided that being actually alone was better than being married and still lonely. Emma felt tears welling up again. I didn't know. I never told Alexander the real reason, Susan continued. I just said his father and I weren't compatible, that we wanted different things. But I promised myself that I would raise my son to be different, to understand that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. And I thought I had succeeded. When Alexander met you, when I saw how he looked at you, I thought, finally, he understands. He's found what really matters. So did I, Emma whispered. I'm going to talk to him, Susan said firmly. I'm going to make him understand what he's throwing away. I don't think he'll listen, Emma said. He's so caught up in the company, in the success, in the image. He'll listen to me, Susan said with the kind of quiet authority that came from years of running multiple businesses and raising a child alone. And if he doesn't, then he's a bigger fool than his father was. Susan stayed for another hour, and for the first time since the IPO, Emma felt like someone was actually on her side, actually understood the impossible position she'd been in. When Susan left, she hugged Emma tightly once more. Whatever happens, Susan said, you're still my daughter. Marriage certificate or no marriage certificate. Understood? Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. 2 days passed. 2 days of Emma hiding in the apartment, avoiding the media circus that had erupted around her post, ignoring the constant stream of calls and messages and interview requests. Alexander hadn't come home at all. He'd sent a few perfunctory texts, working late. Don't wait up. Meeting with lawyers about defamation suits against the blogs. Need to stay at the office for a few days until this blows over. Emma had stopped responding after the first day. What was the point? He was making his choice clear, the company over his marriage, his image over his wife, everything else over her. On the third day, something shifted. Emma woke up with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She was done waiting. Done hoping. Done letting her life be dictated by someone who couldn't even be bothered to come home and fight for their marriage. She called Sophia, who answered on the first ring. Emma. Thank God. I've been worried sick. Are you okay? No, Emma said honestly. But I'm going to be. Sophia, can you recommend a divorce lawyer? There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Are you sure? I'm sure. I gave him a chance. Hell, I gave him 1,000 chances. But I'm done. I deserve better than this. I deserve someone who actually wants to be married to me. Yes, you do, Sophia said fiercely. I know someone. She's tough, brilliant, and she's handled several high-profile divorces. Want me to set up a meeting? Please. I'm so proud of you, Em. This is brave. This is choosing yourself. After she hung up with Sophia, Emma did something she hadn't done in months. She opened her laptop and started working on an architectural design. Just something small, a concept for a community center she'd been dreaming about before everything fell apart. Her hands moved across the digital drafting board with a muscle memory she'd thought she'd lost, and for the first time in 6 months, she felt like herself again. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the front door open, didn't hear footsteps crossing the marble floor, didn't notice anything until a voice said, Emma. She looked up, startled. Alexander stood in the doorway of her office, and she barely recognized him. He looked terrible, hair disheveled, suit rumpled, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. He was holding his phone in one hand, and on the screen, Emma could see her Instagram post displayed. Alexander, she said, her voice carefully neutral. What are you doing here? I live here, he said, but there was no fight in his voice. He looked broken, somehow. Defeated in a way she'd never seen him. Do you? Emma asked. Because I haven't seen you in 3 days. I haven't really seen you in 6 months. Alexander flinched. He walked slowly into the room, and Emma noticed he was looking around like he'd never been in here before, taking in her drafting table, her design books, the sketches pinned to her inspiration board. His eyes landed on her laptop screen, on the community center design she'd been working on. You're designing again, he said softly. Yes. It's beautiful. It's always been beautiful, the way you see spaces, the way you think about how people move through the world. He paused, swallowing hard. I forgot that about you. I forgot. God, Emma, I forgot so many things about you. Emma stayed silent, waiting. She wasn't going to make this easy for him. She wasn't going to be the one to bridge the gap, not anymore. Alexander sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. He put his phone down, the screen still showing her post, and buried his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red. My mother came to see me, he said. She told me what you told her. And then she told me what a complete idiot I've been. What a failure as a husband. What a disappointment as a son. He laughed bitterly. She told me I'd become just like my father. Do you know how much that hurt? How much I've spent my entire life trying not to be like him. Then why did you become him? Emma asked quietly. I don't know, Alexander said, his voice cracking. I don't know when it happened or how it happened. The IPO was supposed to be the beginning of our real life together. We were supposed to have more time, more freedom, more everything. But instead, it just consumed me. Every day there was another crisis, another decision, another opportunity one couldn't miss. And every day I told myself, just one more day, just one more week, and then I'll slow down. Then I'll make it up to Emma. Then I'll be the husband she deserves. But you never did, Emma said. No. I never did. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my wife, as Emma, the woman I love more than anything in the world. You became this fixture, this constant. I knew you'd be there when I got home, whenever I got home, so I stopped appreciating it. I took you for granted in the worst possible way. Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Do you have any idea what that felt like? To be invisible to the person who's supposed to love you most in the world. I'm starting to, Alexander said. He picked up his phone again, looking at her post. When I first saw this, I was angry. Furious. How dare you air our problems publicly? How dare you damage my reputation, the company's image? But then my mother made me actually read it. Really read it. Not just skim it looking for PR problems, but read every word and think about what you were saying. He read it aloud now, his voice shaking. 6 months of silence. 6 months of invisible tears. 6 months of wondering if anyone can see that I'm drowning in plain sight. He looked up at her. You were drowning, and I didn't even notice. What kind of husband does that make me? A bad one, Emma said bluntly. Alexander, you were a terrible husband. For 6 months, you were the worst husband imaginable. He nodded, accepting the truth of it. I know. And I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough. I know that showing up now, after you had to literally break down on social media to get my attention, isn't enough. But Emma, I'm here now. I'm really here. And I want to know, is it too late? Have I destroyed this completely, or is there any chance at all, that we can fix this? Emma looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. She could see the regret in his eyes, the pain, the genuine remorse. But she'd seen regret before. She'd heard apologies before. What she needed to know was whether anything had actually changed. Why now? She asked. Why did it take a viral social media post and your mother yelling at you for you to finally see what you were doing to our marriage? I don't know, Alexander admitted. That's the honest truth. I don't know. I think I was so deep in my own world, so convinced that I was doing everything for us, for our future, that I couldn't see I was destroying our present. My mother said something that really hit me. She said, "What's the point of building an empire if you have no one to share it with? What's the point of success if you lose the only person who ever loved you before the success existed?" He stood up and walked over to her, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. Emma, you loved me when I was nobody. When I was just some guy with an idea and a dream and no money and no prospects. You believed in me before anyone else did. You supported me through every failure, every setback, every moment of doubt. And the second I achieved what we'd been working toward, I abandoned you. That's unforgivable. Yes, Emma said, it is. But I'm asking you to forgive me anyway, Alexander said. I'm asking you to give me one more chance to be the husband I promised to be. The man you married. The person who loved you more than anything. Emma felt her resolve wavering. This was what she'd wanted for 6 months. For him to see her, to hear her, to care. But was it enough? Could she trust that this wasn't just a temporary wake-up call? That he wouldn't slide back into old patterns the moment the crisis passed? I don't know if I can, she whispered. Alexander, you broke my heart. You made me feel worthless. You made me forget who I was. How do I know this is real? How do I know you won't just go back to ignoring me the second this blows over? You don't, Alexander said honestly. You don't know that. All you have is my word, and I know my word hasn't meant much lately. But Emma, I swear to you, I swear on everything I have, everything I've built, that I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving to you that you matter more than any deal, any company, any amount of success. I will show up. I will be present. I will be the husband you deserve. Emma wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. But she'd learned over the past 6 months that wanting something and having it were two very different things. I need time, she said finally. I need to think. And Alexander, I need to see actual change, not just words. I need you to prove it. Anything, he said immediately. Whatever you need. Whatever it takes. I want you to go to couples therapy with me. Done. I want you to set boundaries with work. Real boundaries. No phones at dinner. No working past 9 p.m. unless it's a genuine emergency. At least one full day off per week where you're really, truly present. Yes. Absolutely. Whatever you need. And I want my career back, Emma said. I want to work again. I want to design again. I want to be Emma Rodriguez, architect, not just Mrs. Alexander Chen. Can you handle that? Can you handle having a wife who's building her own success instead of just supporting yours? Alexander smiled, a real smile, the first genuine one she'd seen from him in months. Emma, nothing would make me happier than seeing you design again. You're brilliant. You always have been. I was an idiot for asking you to give that up. Emma felt a tiny spark of hope flickering in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. But she wasn't ready to let him off the hook completely. Not yet. I'm not moving back into our bedroom, she said. Not until I'm ready. Not until I trust you again. I understand. And I'm keeping my appointment with the divorce lawyer next week. Just in case. Just so I know my options. Alexander flinched, but he nodded. I understand that too. I deserve that. They sat in silence for a moment, Emma in her chair, Alexander still kneeling beside her. Finally, tentatively, Alexander reached out and took her hand. She let him, feeling the familiar warmth of his palm against hers, remembering what it felt like to be connected to him. I love you, Emma, he said quietly. I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to show it. But I'm going to remember. I'm going to fight for this. I'm going to fight for us. I love you too, Emma said, and it was true. Despite everything, despite the pain and the loneliness and the broken promises, she still loved him. She just didn't know if love was enough anymore. But Alexander, love isn't enough. Love without action, without presence, without actually showing up, that's not really love at all. That's just an idea of love. You're right, he said. So let me show you. Let me prove it. Starting right now. He pulled out his phone and, right there in front of her, sent an email to his entire executive team, taking the next 3 days off for personal matters. All urgent issues go to Jennifer. Everything else can wait until Monday. No exceptions. Then he turned off his phone completely and set it on her desk. 3 days. Just you and me. No work, no calls, no distractions. Let me start showing you that you're my priority. Emma felt tears streaming down her face again, but these were different tears. Not tears of pain and loneliness, but tears of tentative hope. This was what she'd needed. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but his time, his attention, his presence. Okay, she whispered. Okay. 3 days. Let's see what happens. Alexander pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in 6 months, Emma let herself truly lean into him. She breathed in his scent, felt his heartbeat against her cheek, and allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. There was so much damage to repair, so much trust to rebuild. But for the first time since that selfie, since that post, since this whole nightmare began, Emma felt like they might actually have a chance. And sometimes, that's all you need. A chance, a spark, a tiny flame of hope in the darkness. The rest, they would figure out together. 6 months later, Emma stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, looking out at the New York skyline. But this time, she wasn't alone. Alexander's arms were wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "How different everything is now," Emma said. "How different we are." It had been 6 months since that night. 6 months of hard work, therapy sessions, difficult conversations, and slow, steady rebuilding. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, arguments, moments when Emma had wondered if they were fooling themselves. But there had also been breakthroughs, reconnect irons, and the gradual rediscovery of the partnership they'd once had. Alexander had kept his promises. He'd set boundaries with work, had shown up for therapy every week without fail, had made her a priority in ways both big and small. He came home for dinner. He turned off his phone in the evenings. He asked about her day and actually listened to the answers. He supported her return to architecture, had even used his connections to help her land a major commission designing a new children's hospital wing. And Emma had grown too. She'd learned to voice her needs, to set her own boundaries, to stand up for herself. She'd reclaimed her identity, her career, her sense of self. She was Emma Rodriguez Chen now, a hyphenated name that represented her refusal to be swallowed up by anyone else's identity, even someone she loved. "Your mother called," Alexander said. "She wants to know if we are coming to dinner on Sunday." Emma smiled. Her relationship with Susan had deepened over the past 6 months. Susan had become not just a mother-in-law but a mentor, teaching Emma about balancing ambition with personal life, success with happiness. "Tell her yes," Emma said. "But we are bringing dessert this time." "Deal." Alexander pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm proud of you, you know. The hospital design is incredible. You're going to change lives with that building." "We are going to change lives," Emma corrected. "Your foundation is funding it, remember." "Our foundation," Alexander corrected gently. "It's ours, Em. Everything I have is ours. I should have realized that a long time ago." Emma turned in his arms to face him. "We both made mistakes. I should have spoken up sooner, should have told you how I was feeling instead of suffering in silence." "Still," Alexander said, "I should have noticed. I should have seen you." "You see me now," Emma said. "That's what matters." Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another message about the infamous selfie, which still came up occasionally even 6 months later. But the narrative had changed. Now, instead of being seen as scandal or weakness, her post was being held up as an example of honest vulnerability, of the courage to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. She'd even been invited to speak at several events about marriage, mental health, and the hidden costs of success. At first, she'd been reluctant, but Alexander had encouraged her. "Your story matters," he'd said. "Our story matters. Maybe sharing it can help other people who are drowning in silence the way you were. You know what the best part of all this is?" Emma asked now. What's that? That selfie, that moment of complete breakdown, it saved us. If I hadn't posted it, if I hadn't finally spoken my truth, we'd still be living that lie. Or more likely, we'd be divorced by now. Alexander pulled her closer. I hate that it took something that dramatic to wake me up. But you're right. That post, as painful as it was, as much damage as it caused, it forced us to confront the truth. It made me realize what I was losing. And I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful that you were brave enough to stop pretending. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the city. Emma thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, lost, lonely, invisible. And she thought about the woman she was now, strong, sane, reclaiming her life one day at a time. Marriage was hard. Success was hard. Balancing everything was hard. But for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like they were doing it together, as true partners. Not perfect, not without challenges, but present, committed, and actually fighting for each other instead of against the growing distance between them. I love you, Alexander said. I love you too, Emma replied. And I see you. I really see you. I see you too, he said. And I'm never going to stop looking. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better. It was real. Messy, complicated, imperfect, but real. And sometimes, reality is more beautiful than any fantasy could ever be. Emma smiled, leaned up to kiss her husband, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. One selfie had almost ended everything. But it had also saved everything. And in the end, that moment of brutal honesty had become the foundation on which they rebuilt something even stronger than what they'd lost. Sometimes you have to fall completely apart before you can come back together. Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom before you can climb back up. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply tell the truth, even when, especially when, it's terrifying. Emma had learned that lesson the hard way. But she'd learned it. And she'd never forget it. Their marriage had been tested, broken, and rebuilt. And now, standing in the golden light of sunset with her husband's arms around her, Emma finally felt like she was home. Not in the penthouse, not in the luxury or the success or the money, but in the connection, in the presence, in the love that had remembered how to show up. And that, she thought, was worth everything. And that was how one brave act of honesty changed everything. Emma learned that sometimes you have to lose everything, the comfort, the image, the silence, to finally find yourself again. She found her voice, and in doing so, found her husband too. Love isn't about luxury, or power, or success. It's about presence. It's about showing up, not just when the cameras are watching, but when the tears are real and the silence is heavy. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sammy Stories for more life-changing tales. Until next time, may you never be unseen, unheard, or unloved. May your truth lead you to peace. The selfie that saved a marriage. Sometimes breaking the silence is how love begins again.